Welcome back to Byron Motorsports. My name is Truett, and this is my LS Swap Nissan 720. Now, in my last video, I was finally able to get my Ford Explorer 8.8 mocked up in the truck right about where it's going to sit. Now, I also went ahead and set my pinion angle, which is about 5.5 degrees of an upward slope, or technically a downward slope, I think. But as long as it's parallel to my transmission, which I think it is, we should be good as far as vibrations go. As you can see, it is tack welded in on both sides, so the pinion angle is set as well as its left to right distance, so it should be perfectly centered and right where it's going to sit. The next step is to, of course, add my 4-link bars. This is the cheap kit I got off of eBay. It comes with the lower link as well as a frame mount, the axle mount, the upper link with a frame mount and 2 axle tabs, and of course it comes with 2 of everything, as well as a bunch of hardware. Now, this was a fairly inexpensive kit, so I wasn't expecting everything to be perfect. As you can see, some of these welds around the bars are kind of crappy, so I'm probably going to end up going over everything. And there's also going to be quite a bit of modification that's needed to be done here. First and foremost, since I'm going to be doing the lower bars first, this radius needs to be changed. If I plop it on my axle here, just for a reference, you can see that that is not the same size. I'm also wanting this surface to line up perfectly flat with the back of the axle, which right now it just doesn't do, so if I change this radius, it should fix all of my problems. My frame mounts are going to sit somewhere about here to keep everything as parallel as I can and as low as I can. So I think this upper tab is going to have to kind of get bent to the right, kind of in that direction, and it'll all get welded up and be nice and structural. Now, as far as the upper mounts go, they're meant to go somewhere about here, but I'm not building an axle truss, and I don't want to weld to this cast, and it's an 8.8, so it's offset, and everything would be uneven. So I'm probably going to end up inverting them, going like this, and building a cross member, which is what that piece of 2x4 steel is for. Now, I obviously have a lot of work and a lot of figuring ahead of me, but I think I need to start with getting rid of this thing because it's right in the way of my axle mount for this side. And I'll obviously be chopping this old leaf spring crap off, but it's not in my way, so I'm not quite concerned about that right now. Also, the angle iron that I used to get this thing kind of mocked up where it's going to be is now in my way. Go figure. Now, if we look on the back side, this is right about where this thing's going to be sitting, but it's hitting the angle iron, and it actually needs to go that way just a little bit more. So I'm probably going to just have to put a lot of trust in these crappy tack welds I got thrown on here and cut the bottom pieces off now that everything's secure, and hopefully nothing moves and I'll have plenty of room to weld everything. But I can only procrastinate for so long if I ever want to get this truck done. So I'm going to get the angle iron and get this chopped off first, and then we'll figure out what to do next. I don't know what the fuck this thing was. Alright, now that that's out of the way, I think I'm going to go ahead and try to contour these to fit the axle a little bit better. The sun's starting to go down and it's going to be dark soon, and I don't think I'm ready to cut these off just yet, so that'll probably be a tomorrow thing. But if I can get these fitting nice, both sides, I'll be happy. Now, the 8.8 is right around 3.25 in diameter, I believe. This caliper doesn't measure it perfectly, but that'll be good enough for what we're doing. So if we come in the shop here, I found this old bearing that is right at the perfect diameter. And if I set it up here and get everything lined up nicely, that'll give me a nice template to mark on. And if I lay everything flat, it's actually a lot better of a template because, like I said, I want that to be flat with the back of my axle. So that works out perfect. So I got this marked out to the best of my ability. You can see if I put this up here, it is definitely going to match a lot better. I'm going to go and do this to the other side and the other piece, and then I'm going to get them ground down, and hopefully they'll fit a lot better. It might be a little bit of fine tuning to do, but I think it'll be worth it in the end. So that's the first one done. You can see kind of what I was going for there. It sits nice and flat on the back. I'm going to go ahead and do the other one before it gets completely dark out here, and we'll pick back up tomorrow. So I got both pieces nice and contoured to the axle. I take a straight edge and put on the back. Everything lines up nicely. So now in order to get these in position, I need to cut the bottom of this angle iron off like I was talking about, but I'm kind of scared to do so, so I'm going to get everything cleaned up and throw some extra bubble gum on there just to be sure. Now, the reason I was so scared to cut these bottom pieces of angle iron off is because it took me a lot of time, a couple of days actually, worth of measuring and figuring and welding just to get this axle in its final position, all of which I did in my last video, which you should definitely go check out. So of course, if it moves from this position, it's going to be a huge headache, and I'm going to have to redo a whole bunch of work that I've already done, and I don't really want to do that. But considering there wasn't any other options, I just had to put faith in myself and cut them off and hope for the best. Which, as you can see, turned out fine, but I was still a little scared and very cautious not to put any more weight on the axle than I had to. So that's both pieces cut off. As you can see, the axle is free hanging now, so I should have plenty of room to get my mounts in. However, it is currently raining, so I'm gonna have to pick this back up tomorrow. And now that it's not raining, for now at least, I'm gonna go ahead and clean up the underside of the axle, get rid of that old tack weld, and get everything nice and ready for welding. Now I can finally get these pinned up under here and figure out exactly where they need to go. The way I think I'm going to do this is by kind of mounting everything up to the bar and to this link itself and kind of getting it to where it all sits nicely with the frame rail. Now theoretically, the tab on this bracket should be the same amount of distance from the frame rail as the tab on that bracket, but this cheap eBay kit's kind of wonky, so we'll see how that goes. Either way, if I just take my time and measure everything out nicely, I think I'll get it good enough. Now I didn't have an exact plan on how I was going to do this. I obviously needed to start by getting the mounts themselves cleaned up and ready for welding, which was the easy part, but then I needed to figure out how I was going to hold and measure everything. I decided to try using some tie wire to pin it in place by twisting it around until it was nice and tight, which for the time being did work pretty good. Then it was just a matter of adjusting and leveling, measuring, making sure everything was right where I wanted it. I didn't know exactly what to reference off of, but like I said earlier, the distance from the front tab should be the same for the back, so that's what I went with. Also decided to try using the bars themselves to help me keep everything aligned, which was putting a lot of faith in the Chinese welds to be 90 degrees, but like I said, it'll be close enough. As it would turn out, the use of the tie wire wasn't the best idea, so I decided just to switch to zip ties, which I should have done in the first place. Once again, more measuring, leveling, and a lot, and I mean a lot of adjusting. And I was finally happy with where they were, so I decided to go ahead and tack them in place. It was the same process on the other side, so I didn't show any of it, but you get the idea. New day again. Both links are tacked in place right where they're going to go, and I'm really happy with their position. However, it does look a little bit different than I guess it did, well, what, a few minutes ago? I have spent several hours for the past couple of days playing around with these links, swapping them back and forth, trying to figure out exactly where I want them to go. However, I do think that this right here is the most optimal place that they can be. I'm sure you noticed I swapped my uppers for my lowers and my lowers for my uppers, which I think is going to work out a whole lot better. I'm going to be shortening these now so that they intersect at about the same point, which should hopefully keep my pinion angle change very minimal. Also, if we look at it from the side here, this one is sloping up about 2 or 3 inches or so across its entire length, and this one is going to slope up about a whole inch or so across its entire length. This is for my anti-squat rate. And basically what I'm trying to do is make it to where if these two were to intersect, they would land somewhere around the camshaft firewall area. Now what this does, or hopefully does, is gives me a near perfect anti-squat rate. What this means is that when I accelerate in this truck, the axle is going to stay right where it's at. It's not going to try moving up or down with any forces. Now, of course, this is all in theory. I have no actual clue, but this is what I'm going with. Now, a couple of reasons that I went with this in particular design, with the longer ones up here and the shorter ones down there, etc., is that if I were to use the shorter ones up top, I wouldn't really have anywhere to tie them into. They would have to be inverted since my 8.8 is off center, and on that side there was no room to, well, not invert them. But if they were inverted, that means they would be landing somewhere about here, which means I'd have to make a cross member about here somewhere that goes out and around the drive shaft, leaving enough room for suspension travel, and it would just be way too close to this, and my links still wouldn't have a proper angle, and I just didn't like that. So instead, with this setup, my cross member can be way over here now, which means that when it comes to going around the drive shaft, I'll have a little bit tighter tolerances. And since the links are now going to be equal length, I can tie the lower ones into that same cross member, whereas before, if I did a cross member, here somewhere, then there was a good chance that the lower links, or, the upper links now, but the lower links at that time would have hit said cross member. So just none of those iterations were going to work. This is what I came up with, and I think it's going to be the best. I haven't seen another one done exactly like this, so I'm kind of just keeping my fingers crossed, and with the research I've done, it should be good enough. So like I said, the next step is to build the cross member. I'm going to be using this piece of 2x4 rectangular tubing to do so. I am going to have to get a little bit more in length, obviously by the time I go, up and over. But since this is almost the perfect length to fit in there, I'm going to go ahead and weld it in like this. That way I know it's nice and equal left to right, and then I'll cut the center out. So now I need to trim probably just a little bit off so that it'll fit between my two frame rails. So this is right about where the cross member is going to sit. Now, like I've said before, since this driveway isn't perfectly level and the distance to the ground from left to right is a little bit different, I'm going to be doing everything on the left side and kind of using that as my reference for the right side. We'll see how it goes. So now that I got it fitting nicely, I need to take it back out, get the frame cleaned up, and get it tacked in place. I am not going to be welding it in solid until I cut the middle, because if I were to weld it in solid and then cut the middle, they would likely shift on me. So I'm going to get it all kind of tacked up as an assembly first, and then I'll do final welding later. So the camera died, but I got it all tacked in place. It is getting pretty dark out here, so I'm gonna get everything cleaned up and we'll be back at it tomorrow. All right, it is once again a new day. It is nice and shiny out here today. As you can see, I went ahead and added a piece of string that runs all the way from my axle up to the transmission output. And I've got a piece of 3-inch paper plate on here, and this is acting as my drive shaft. And if you're wondering why it's offset up here, it's because I've raised it 3 inches, which is the max travel that this axle should ever see before it hits the C-notch. Meaning that this is the highest the drive shaft should ever get, so I know I need to build my cross member around that. Now hopefully this truck will never see that 3 inches of suspension travel, but just in case, I want to have the clearance. However, when I'm filming this, it is Memorial Day weekend, so I can't get any steel for a couple days, so I'm going to have to wait on building the cross member up and around the drive shaft, and I'm going to focus on welding on the tabs for my lower links. I've also done a little bit more calculating with everything, and the lower links are going to sit dead center right here on the cross member, and then the upper links are going to sit, well, right on the cross member that's going to be right above the drive shaft, and everything should work out perfect. Now I'm actually going to be using these tabs to make these tabs, which I think in the kit they were meant for the uppers on the axle, but the uppers on the axle are going to be made out of these since I need to raise it up off the axle about 3 inches, so it all kind of works out perfect. So now I just need to get all 4 of these tabs. I don't know where the other 2 are at, but I need to get them all ground down so that they'll fit on here nicely. You can see they're a little bit too long and they've got some bad shape to them. So I'm going to get these cleaned up and tacked in place. Alright, that is both sides tacked in place right where they're going to go. I'm super happy with how that turned out. I'm going to be adding some metal like this kind of to support everything and keep it rigid left to right, but I can't do that until I fully weld these up, and I'm not going to fully weld these up until the whole cross member is tacked in place. So that'll have to wait for a little bit. But now, unfortunately, I've got to wait until I get some more steel to do my cross member, so I guess I'll pick it back up at a later date. While I've been waiting for the last couple of days, I actually went ahead and made my lower coilover mounts. I didn't film it for this video, I was going to, but I just forgot. But I did make a video on my TikTok, Instagram, and my YouTube shorts if you want to go check that out. I also went ahead and fixed this. I'm sure some of you were wondering how I was going to weld that after I tacked this tab in place, so I actually had to knock this back off, went ahead and welded that up, and then put it back on using this tab for alignment. Alright, I finally got my highly anticipated 2-foot piece of steel, so I'm going to quit talking, start cutting some shit up, and try to get this thing done. And just like that, the cross member is all tacked in place. It looks really sweet in my opinion. It is very tall, but this is what was necessary. Now, of course, it's not perfect. Trying to make perfect 60-degree cuts with an angle grinder isn't the easiest thing. This is the biggest gap here. It's probably about an 1/8 inch or so, but nothing a welder can't fix. In the future, I'm probably gonna add some cross braces that go from about here over to here on the C to help make everything a lot more rigid. Because if you look at the axle, the wheel spins this way if you're going forward, so the axle tries to spin this way, which shoves into the lowers, but it pulls on the uppers. So adding those cross braces should make everything a lot stiffer. However, I'm gonna have to call it for this video. This has taken quite a lot longer than I was expecting it to, and it's probably running pretty long, but we'll pick right back up on the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider liking and or subscribing, or at least telling your friends that I'm building a badass mini truck.